Welcome to the Rise of the Challenge podcast. Joining me today, he's the CEO and founder of Parkour Generations. It's Dan Edwards. How are you doing today, Dan?
I'm very good, man. And you?
I'm doing good. I'm excited to have you on the show and talk about your rise to the challenge. First thing we like to do with all of our guests is we talk about right at the beginning. Where are you from and what were you involved in growing up?
I'm from West Sussex in England, which is kind of the southeast of the country. Very countryside area, very green, very beautiful area, very kind of quiet area, really. And I grew up there, went to school there, and then moved to Cambridge for university, and then after university moved to Japan, lived there for 5 years or so, and then came back to the UK, I think in around 2004, and have lived in London since then, and traveling around the world a lot since then. So that's kind of been my locations, I suppose. And what did I, growing up, what was I involved in? I was from an early age, I was incredibly fascinated by martial arts and physical training, and grew up with those kind of superhero ideals that a lot of boys had of my generation in terms of action heroes and superhero comics and martial art movies and Bruce Lee and, you know, all this sort of stuff, and grew up wanting to sort of emulate the skills that those individuals had. So, you know, me and my peers, we grew up basically learning to fight, learning survival skills, you know, spending most of our time out in the forest building camps and climbing stuff and going on explorations and adventures and hikes, and very kind of, in a way, a very wild upbringing, I suppose. And that then, as I became a teenager, that focused into a real intense focus into practical fighting arts and martial arts. And that continued the whole way through my life. Even through university, where I was studied Oriental studies, so Japanese and history were my postgrad and undergrad degrees, and then I moved to Japan to study a specific fighting art that you can only train there, and then I encountered parkour, and when it was very young, and the discipline of parkour sort of grabbed me, and I became pretty fanatical about training in that with the founders, and then it kind of became a career from there, became a profession from there for the last kind of 15 years. I guess that's been my profession. So it's been a very strange journey to get here, but a very interesting one for me anyway.
Was there anything during the time that you were learning martial arts that challenged you and something that you were trying to achieve?
I mean, studying you know, training in the fighting arts is challenging from day one, I suppose. And for me, the challenge was always how I was really interested in the practical elements of it. The martial arts is it's a broad term, right? So it includes lots of different aspects of training, lots of different approaches to training, whether it be the sport element or the self-improvement element, or, you know, that kind of thing, or just following tradition or whatever. But I was always very interested in the practical application of it, kind of what actually works, what's effective in a sort of a combat situation, and how can you learn that, and how can you tell that, especially when you're young and you can't really, you know, how do you practice that, and you can't actually just go out and fight people. You can go out and fight people, but it's not the ideal thing. So how do you actually know how you're training, whether your training is being effective or not? And there's a lot of, you know, fakery and stuff in the martial arts, which if you train it a lot, you realize that there's a lot of illusion and myth and things like that. So you kind of have to cut through that. So that was always a challenge growing up, was how do I know this is working, and how do I find really the best stuff, the really good stuff? How do I find that? How do I access it? And the more you go into it, the more you realize that it is quite hard to access that stuff, and you're going to have to make an effort to find it. You're going to have to travel, and, you know, I was very interested in also specifically in armed combat, so learning how to use weapons, and particularly the sword always really interested me. But again, not sport forms. I wasn't interested in fencing or kendo or any of the sport forms. I was interested in kind of the real use of the sword, and, you know, pretty early on, I realized that the only way to learn that would be to travel to Japan, where there's a school that still trains the original, sort of the oldest Japanese martial art, and still teaches that. But there's only one school in the world. So if you want to learn it, you've got to go to Japan and live there and train in that. So that was a challenge, I suppose. But it seemed like a natural step, you know. So for me, it was all these challenges were fairly, um, it was fairly not easy, but it was, I knew I'd find solutions to them because I was so passionate about it. So I believe if you're truly passionate about something, no matter how challenging it seems, you will find a solution. If the will is there, if the passion is there, you will always find a way. And that's kind of what I've always followed, I suppose.
Did martial arts help you as a personal reflection, like help with mindset or the way that you behaved in certain situations?
Yeah, I mean, hugely, and in uh, obviously, books and whole disciplines are based on this on this idea of the self discipline that comes from training in a practice like that, and the self knowledge that you learn really through any sort of challenge. I mean, the way I see martial arts is, and parkour and any good discipline is that it would be best defined as a transformative practice, and that term really means any discipline that through the practice of which transforms you as an individual. And there are certain things for something to be a transformative practice. There are certain sort of bases that it needs to have, such as it needs to be regular. You need to be training in it regularly, if not every day. But a lot of your time needs to be devoted to it, if not the majority of your time. Probably should be devoted to that thing. It needs to have a skill aspect to it, so some way in which you can know that you're getting better or worse. There needs to be a challenge, and a challenge that is something that you can be scaled. So a level of challenge that is equal or slightly higher than your level of skill. As you get better, that challenge continues to grow with you. If your practice has got those things, whatever it is, whether it's a martial art or flower arranging or carpentry or music or whatever your practice is, then it can be a transformative thing, which means it can improve you as an individual, and raise your self-knowledge and your self-awareness. And for me, certainly the martial arts had a huge impact on me in that way. And I obviously all the things that come with the martial arts that are great, things such as the philosophies, especially the East Asian and Southeast Asian philosophies that go with it. Those things teach you a lot of really good stuff early on, and I was heavily involved in studying and understanding that right from the start. So, and not only that, you learn the physical discipline. You learn how to you learn the limits of your body. You learn the capabilities of your body, but you also learn the 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 the, um, the damage that you can inflict, and therefore why you shouldn't inflict it, and that sort of thing, and also the weakness of your body in terms of, if you make the wrong decision in life, you can get badly hurt, or go up against the wrong person or something like that. So you learn to respect yourself, and you learn to respect everyone else around you, and the world at large. I think so. I think they're a really good thing for young people to get involved in.
You talked about the philosophy and the education side of martial arts. Do you think nowadays, like the media kind of takes it in a wrong direction in kind of what martial arts is, as more people think about it as just fighting each other, but the way you've been talking about it, it's more, there's more to it, and the kind of the aspects of how much you can inflict in pain and stuff like that, more of the education side.
Yeah, I mean um, the media and the current sort of, I suppose, the bent towards producing good TV, and getting ratings and things like that has led towards it, I suppose, an increase in the showcase side of things in the martial arts, similar in parkour as well, and disciplines like that, because of the need to appeal to people visually in a very quick format, very bite-sized format that social media and TV and things like that present. So there has been, I suppose, an increase in that. But anyone that then gets into training in a martial art, if it is taught well, this is the key thing. If it is taught well, then they will soon find those elements, those deeper elements, and about themselves, that self-knowledge piece. They will probably encounter it. So that's still very much there and very much alive in the martial arts, especially in the traditional arts. One of the best things about the traditional fighting arts is that those traditions really emphasize the sort of the self-knowledge and the self-discipline piece. Even while they perhaps sacrifice the practical application of it, that's not necessarily a bad thing, because at the end of the day, the world probably doesn't need more people that can fight. It probably needs more people that are self-aware. So it's great that those systems and those traditions really focus on that heavily. So I think it's always been there, and it's still there. But of course, if you switch on YouTube and put in martial arts or whatever, it will give you show you street brawls and the best knockout or whatever. It'll always show you the physical visual side of it, because it's a visual medium. But if you go to a good school in any art, you should find people teaching the right kind of ethics, I think, hopefully.
What was that dream job that you were wanting growing up?
It's an interesting question. I never really knew. I never really had a dream job growing up. I mean, I knew I knew what I didn't want to do. That's more important. That was more important to me. I knew from a very early age, I knew that I had no interest in doing like a traditional kind of 9 to 5 job where I was just working for the money. I had no interest in that at all, right from being very, very young. And I remember people telling me, whatever these crazy age, they ask kids, what you want to be in life, like 8, 9 and stuff like that, 8, 9, 10 years old. And I remember even then thinking, being quite resistant to that question of, what do you want to do? You're going to have to get a job when you're older. What do you want to do? And you start thinking about it. I remember being quite resistant to that question, thinking, why do I have to think like that? This is just because you've done that, and just because society's done that before me. Why do I have to do that? I don't think like that. I don't want to think like that. So I was very resistant to it. I knew that I liked studying in academia, so I would continue to study and went on to university. But and I loved writing and creating stories and telling stories like that. So I kind of thought maybe I'll end up writing. But I always just kind of knew that I wanted to study more. I wanted to learn more about the fighting arts and the martial arts and that pathway I'd chosen. So after university, I went to Japan to study those arts that I couldn't study anywhere else. But I didn't really have a career in mind. I mean, when I lived in Japan, I was lecturing at university. I was a university lecturer to sort of pay my bills while I was training there. But it wasn't my dream job. It was just kind of like, this is a good way to keep me alive while I'm doing what I really want to do, which is study the fighting arts. Certainly, my career has been since coming back from Japan, and I've done a few different things in business or whatever. But basically, since coming back from Japan, my career has been parkour. And teaching parkour and the performing parkour on movies and stunt world or whatever, and then creating and running parkour companies and organizations worldwide, and creating coaching certifications and all the stuff we've done. That's been my career. And at no stage growing up, if someone had said, your career will be you'll be running a parkour company, that didn't even exist obviously when I was growing up. So I never would have thought I would have ended up doing this. So and I, looking back, and I don't think that's a bad thing. I speak a lot now to business students at university who are sort of looking to get into entrepreneurship or run their own businesses or just get into business in general. And one of the things I'm pretty eager to make them aware of, and younger kids aware of as well, is that you don't have to select your career in your teenage years or even your 20s. You don't necessarily, especially in this day and age, you don't need to know that from a really early age. It doesn't really matter. What matters is the things you love doing, and you spend time in that area and moving in that space. And over time, what you actually want to do, and the bisect between what you want to do and what you love doing and what can keep you alive, what makes money and what can be of use to the world, those things will intersect, and you will eventually find out sort of a career or make a career out of it. But if you don't know what you want to do at the age of 17, 18, it's not a problem. Or even 24, 25, I don't think it's a problem. I think our apprenticeship years, which used to be teenage years, 100 years ago, your teen years were your apprenticeship years. I think our apprenticeship years are now in our 20s, because career paths are so fluid now, and you can change jobs so easily and move horizontally from one company to another. And the average lifespan in a job now is 2 years. It's kind of the average. I think you spend 2 years in a company and then you move on. So it's very, very different from even 50 years ago. So that's a long-winded answer to say I never had a dream job, and but now looking back, I'm very glad that I ended up doing what I did, because I can't imagine a better, a more interesting sort of career for me doing, especially the parkour stuff. Allowed me to travel all over the world and meet amazing people and be involved in really, really interesting industries. I can't imagine, I'm not sure I could work out a better way to do that than how it played out.
I think people wonder why I asked that question. I think it's one of those things where when you ask someone that dream job, I know my dream job when I was younger was, oh, I want to be a game show host. That was just something I was into at that time. But obviously, I'm not even close to that right now. But you kind of see the characteristics in that person and what they're passionate about, even if it's not specifically that job that they're going for. And like you said, when I was in my 20s, I was finding what I was passionate about, and it kept changing with different activities I was doing, different events I was doing. And you find out, okay, I can see myself in this direction. And like I said, this podcast came out of nowhere. I never even thought about it when I was growing up. Oh, I wanted to host a show. But maybe that kind of went back to, oh, I wanted to be a game show host in a way.
Yeah.
So it's always interesting to see that the things that you do now, sometimes you can take different aspects of that dream job and you're still utilizing that today.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's and there's definitely a crossover there. The whole game show host thing. I mean, it's if you look at the attributes of that, it is someone that is happy talking to people, holding dialogues and sort of almost managing the dialogue in a way, because a game show host, you're asking questions about the people on the game show, right? You're asking them to talk about themselves, which is similar to what a podcast host does. So that probably shows those kind of instincts in you from a young age, and that's probably the thing that you should focus on when you're young, is just think about what are the things that what are the attributes that you enjoy expressing, what do you like doing, what do you love doing, what brings you joy and happiness, and then spend time doing that. That's what I say. That's what I think kids should be doing, certainly in their pre-teen years, and then in their teen years they should be following their passions, and not, it's a problem with the whole education system at the moment. It's probably the same in the States as it is over here, but in the kids these days, more and more have to spend time working solely to pass exams, and to get into the right sort of exam lane, to get them at the right stage so they can then get to the right school and then get to the right university and then get to the right job. And they have to sacrifice their childhood in a way to do that, and that's just really, really terribly wrong. And I'm pretty sure that in 100 years or so, society will look back on that era and think, what the hell? That was really crap, and just a waste of time. Kids don't need to be doing that at all, as Finland and countries like that prove with their education system. So that I think is bad, and I think kids these days should be encouraging them to follow their passions more, giving them more time to play, to be themselves, to explore, and they're not going to grow up any more or less competent than pushing them through ridiculous exams. They'll definitely grow up more competent in a broad way, actually, and they'll be no less intelligent. They'll just be more educated on the things they want to be educated on, and things they're interested in, rather than wasting their time learning stuff that they don't really need to know, probably. So yeah, I think getting kids to follow their passion is a key thing, and then that will naturally lead them to where they want to be, probably.
I think that is the biggest thing. Like the things that I learned in college, most of that I don't even remember now. I think if it was a science class, I don't even remember what I learned. And that's the hard part when you have friends that are in college and you're just hearing, oh, I have to study. I don't have time to do this. It's like the world, the day is young. I don't even know what the phrase I was trying to go with there, but like there's so much time that you should be enjoying the experiences you have, because you're making those friends and you're building those lifelong memories, and you don't want to be stuck in a dorm room or a table, a library, studying all the time. And I think that's the hard part. Is I was one of those people where I just wanted to get out in the real world or get that experience in the real world of the stuff that I was passionate about. And so hopefully in the years to come, the education system will change, but I don't regret what I did, but I wish I did it a little bit differently. But it's one of those things that we can look back on. When you lived in Japan, what's the biggest thing you learned about yourself?
I guess the biggest thing I learned about myself in Japan is that my time out there, I spent a lot of time traveling around Asia while I was there, and I suppose the biggest thing I learned about myself was that the world is there to explore and that I could do it. I spent a lot of time before that in a fairly cloistered environment, I suppose, in terms of Cambridge. I was there for 5 years, and it's a beautiful place to study, an amazing town, and ancient university. I had great friends there, and it was an amazing place. But it's it's a very small place. It's an ivory tower in that way. And when I lived in Japan and got to travel around a lot and explore a different culture in that way, and you're completely by yourself. You are very, very isolated when you go and live in a country like Japan, which some people don't like at all, because it is a very different culture from ours in the West, and you're treated very well and very politely, but because you're an outsider there, in many ways, you it's very hard for you to feel like you're part of the culture, to sort of get past the facade, and get past the layer of politeness, to actually get to know people in Japan. And I was able to do that easier because I spoke Japanese, because I studied at university, and I understood Japanese culture because I studied their culture and their history and their literature and martial arts since I was a kid. So I had a way in. So I was able to connect more with the communities there and the culture and make Japanese friends and etc. But a lot of people find that very tough. But you are basically by yourself, out there when you go and do what I did. So, and I think the main thing I discovered was that I could do that, and that I could live abroad and learn and travel and explore, and it wasn't a problem. It was actually a very liberating thing, and the world isn't as scary or inaccessible as maybe many people are taught. Maybe now, maybe especially these days. But that it's actually, if you go out there, if you just put energy into something like that, the world responds, and you get to see amazing things and meet amazing people and explore amazing places. And that is incredibly beneficial. Again, another thing that I think all young people, should do is go and live abroad for kind of at least 6 months or a year, when they're pretty young. Maybe it's a gap year, or between school and university, or just after university or whatever. But fairly early on, you should live abroad for at least a year. I think it's really, really healthy, because it teaches you that people all over the world are pretty much the same. They have the same desires, the same fears, the same needs, the same community bonds. All those underlying things that makes human are the same everywhere. And you realize that we have more in common than we have that differentiates us on the whole. And you see the strengths and the weaknesses of different cultures, and therefore you're able to recognize the strengths and the weaknesses of your own culture, because you see it from a distance. And I think that's very, very important. So, yeah, I learned a huge amount from living out in Japan, and it was, an awesome time. And yeah, I'd recommend everyone go and live abroad when you're young.
Is there anything that you've taken from the culture living in Japan that you use now in your daily life?
Yeah, I mean, in many ways, because I studied Japanese and sort of East Asian culture growing up a lot, and was heavily drawn to it. And obviously, the overlap with the martial arts was obvious. So in many ways, I kind of already was already applying many of the sort of East Asian philosophies and the core concepts, let's say in Taoism maybe, and Buddhism, and those sort of old philosophies of Asia. I was already sort of living, not fully aligned with them, but I was already utilizing those concepts and principles in my own life. So and I'd been meditating when I was very young, started that when I was very young, and those sort of things. So and in living in Japan, I suppose you see over here, when you're raised over here, those things are exotic, and you see them as separate things from your daily life, but tools to use. Whereas when you live in a country like Japan, I suppose you see where they come from, and you see how they're just embedded in that culture. So the ideals in Japan, especially of discipline and self-discipline, and etiquette and politeness, and attention to detail, and all these kind of things. It's just sort of everywhere in Japan in a way. So because it's part of their culture, so you that then feeds back into your life, and if you live out there long enough, I suppose you can't help but acquire some of those things and take them away. But I was already, when I lived in Japan, I felt it quite easy to live there in a way, because I'd already sort of grown up understanding and studying that culture. So when I moved there, it wasn't a big culture shock to me in a way. Whereas I think for a lot of, well, I know for a lot of Westerners who when I was out there, who also moved out there and lived there, or whatever I encountered out there, many of them experienced a huge culture shock, and some of them couldn't handle it and had to leave. And that's understandable, because if you have never had any idea of what it's going to be like, you are probably in for a shock. But yeah, no. So I think I'd already sort of learned a lot of that stuff, I guess, and then it just got reinforced when I was in Japan, probably.
So when was the first time you kind of found out about parkour? Or you mentioned that it wasn't really something that was well known back then. So when was that first taste of parkour for you?
Yeah, no, I mean, parkour didn't really come together as a discipline until the late 90s in France. So, growing up, it didn't even exist when I was growing up. So, they had no idea about it. And then I first encountered it in kind of 2001, when it was shown as there was a movie called Yamakasi, which is a French movie by Luc Besson, which featured the founding guys, the Yamakasi in France, and that was shown on theaters in France and Japan only. And I saw that and was very interested by it in terms of the movement abilities of the people in that film, and I could kind of tell they weren't normal stunt people, and that it was, a lot of it was, they were actually doing those movements, and you sort of that piqued my interest, and I began to study and research who they were and what they were doing, and began to kind of try and emulate their movements in a way. And living in Japan, I was living in Japan at the time, so there was no access to these guys in France. So it was very hard to sort of, and it wasn't like today where you can do a Zoom call or whatever. This is pre-YouTube, and there were internet forums for things, but there was like one forum for parkour in French. But there was no ease of communication like there is these days. There was no social media and all that sort of stuff. So it was very hard to get information. So me and two friends out in Japan, we began to try and emulate the movements and try and teach ourselves in a way. It was only when I moved back to Europe in the summers for holidays in between university terms that I was able to sort of connect with the European community, the French founders, and the fledgling UK community, and then begin practicing and training with them, and actually learning stuff direct from the source. So that was my first taste of it. Was pretty rough and ready for the first couple of years, until I eventually moved back to the UK in 2004, and then a couple of the French founders, that community, they came to live in the UK, and we began to train sort of every day, all day, every day, really. And that was when it really picked up, I suppose. But parkour no one knew about it. I mean, until when I started, there were maybe 50 people in the world who even knew the word, who even knew what it was. And maybe 20 of them were regular practitioners, 20, 30, maybe. That was it in the world. So then Jump London was a big turning point. That was a Channel 4 documentary by a guy called Mike Christie. That was released in 2003. And that when that went out, we saw the numbers jump. The forum online in the UK had about 100 people on it, I guess, at that stage. And then the next day after that went out, that documentary, there were like 10,000 people on the forum overnight. That documentary really made the world aware of what it was, and from there it grew. But back when I started, yeah, there was hardly anyone doing it. There was no professional organization. There was no classes. There were no coaching qualifications. There were no gyms, no clubs. No websites. Nothing. It was very rough and ready.
When you were training with parkour, did you kind of see some similarities with that in the skills that you've learned during your martial arts time, or was it completely two different kind of skill sets?
I mean, they're different skill sets, but there is a huge overlap. in the physical attributes and and I suppose in the concepts of what I was trying to do. So the reason I was attracted to parkour, you know, I grew up with this kind of, as I said, all this idea of like trying to make yourself as complete and as competent, as capable an individual as you can be, physically and psychologically, you know, in order to help people if they need it, help your friends, protect yourself, protect your family, you know, deal with situations if they arise. So you're kind of constantly looking for this sort of physical competence and psychological competence. And when I encountered parkour, I realized that there was a huge area missing in my competence. In that I was, you know, I would learn to fight and learn to, you know, deal with those situations. I'd learn, you know, sort of medical first aid basic skills. I'd learn survival skills for the wild. You know, I'd learn sort of tactical skills and things like that for urban survival and whatever. But then when I saw those movement skills displayed, I realized that is an area that I do not have. You know, I don't have this capability to move like these guys do across rooftops, or get over any obstacle that's in your path, or survive a big drop, or whatever. That was it was like a missing piece in the puzzle. So for me, it was a complementary part of a complementary aspect of training that I needed to add to what I already did. So there was a huge overlap conceptually, in that I was interested in practical, functional use of my skills, not only in martial arts fighting, but also in like, can I actually, could I get from, could I cross this gap? Could I jump from here to there? Could I climb that wall? Could I get down there? You know, could I get over this obstacle? And not sort of, not in an arbitrary way, not like, are you fit and strong in a sort of gym way, but is your strength and your fitness functional? Can it actually do these things? Can you actually use your body when you need to? And that was what parkour gave to me. And you know, I was hooked from day one when I began training. So there was a huge overlap, and there's also an overlap psychologically, obviously, in the fear factor that you encounter in parkour, and that same factor that you encounter when you fight people, and in martial arts, the fact that you've got someone, you know, across from you who's trying to cause you harm, or even if they're just trying to beat you in a competition or whatever, you know, you've still got that kind of fear factor going on. And parkour really makes you face that fear very, very intensely from day one. And so there's a lot of overlap. And for me, it was, you know, I was hooked from day one, and I knew pretty much, I knew from the first jump that I completed, I knew then that I would be training in this for, you know, my whole life.
Was injuries ever a situation for you? Like, were you able to know how to perfect a certain jump without causing the harm in a body?
I mean, you learn how not to get injured, I suppose. So in parkour, like any athletic discipline, there are risks of injury. You know, if you play rugby, if you do 100-meter sprints, if you're a high jumper, you know, there are chances that you're going to get injured, of course, because you're using your body and you're pushing the limits of your body. So parkour is the same. No worse or better than any of those disciplines, really. Statistically, it's probably safer than a lot of sports in terms of injuries that you per 1,000 hours of training, which is how sport injuries are typically counted. But it's probably no better or worse than any athletic discipline, really, in terms of risk. So, and if you approach it like those disciplines, if you approach it with a sort of gradual training methodology and a structured approach to understanding the movements and building the right strengths in your body, and you don't rush ahead too fast, then yeah, you can learn to complete these movements and use your body in this way without exposing it to much injury. So I've been training, you know, parkour, I suppose, since 2001 roughly, so almost 20 years. And I've been a professional athlete in parkour since probably 2005. So 15 years. And, you know, I broke my arm early on in training. That's not a problem. It's just a broke a bone in the wrist, and that took, you know, 6 weeks to heal. 2006, I think. And then I broke a bone in my foot at a show in China for Adidas in like 2008, and that was misdiagnosed. So it took a bit of time for that to heal. But other than that, I've had no major injuries in parkour really. So you know, you learn parkour practitioners are seen as adrenaline sports and adrenaline junkies, but actually most practitioners, and indeed most sports that are labeled adrenaline sports, are mislabeled. It's not about that at all. It's not about seeking adrenaline or seeking risk even. It's just about being able to achieve these skills and movements that you want to achieve, and get the feeling of achievement in that way, while not getting hurt. So actually most parkour practitioners are very risk averse. We're very good at calculating and managing the factors around a movement or a jump to reduce the risk as much as possible, because we don't want to get injured, because if you get injured you can't go and train tomorrow, and that's the worst thing in the world. So parkour practitioners are very, very risk averse. They will typically only take the risks that they know they're really, really good at making those calculations, and if they're not able to make those calculations, they'll probably step back from the jump and won't do it. So you learn to be very good at sort of managing risk and understanding when you are capable of doing something, and the difference between a risk and a dangerous situation. They're very different things. Risk and danger are very different. So we don't engage in dangerous things. Danger is where you can't control the situation, can't control the outcome. That's a dangerous situation. We don't ever engage in that. So in parkour, we engage with risk, which are situations in which we can control the outcome. And we get very good at dealing with that, I suppose.
Talk about the impact you've had on the parkour community within the United Kingdom. What have you been involved in, and what was those missions that you're wanting to accomplish?
Yeah, so potentially a long answer, I suppose. But I mean, again, when we started, we were building Parkour Generations. We were the first people to teach parkour anywhere in the world, right? So we set up the classes. We set up the idea of a parkour class, and it took off very quickly. So very quickly we had a huge demand for people wanting to learn, and we began to get asked to teach in school. Can we teach in schools? Can we teach the military? Can we teach high-level athletes? Can we teach couch potatoes? And we basically found ways to adapt our teaching methodology to any group that wanted to learn, so that they could get the benefits of this movement practice. And very early on, we were dragged around the world to teach that. So we ended up teaching in the States, in Asia, in South Africa, in South America, in Australia, Russia, wherever. So we sort of, I guess, we began the teaching sort of tidal wave in the world in parkour, and we helped many of the communities around the world learn how to train, and then how to then teach others. So I guess that's probably the biggest impact that we've had. And we then went on to create the coaching certifications, the ADAPT qualifications, which are the global sort of coaching certifications for parkour. We created those back in 2008. And so we've spent a lot of the last 10 years running those certifications around the world. They've been delivered in about 40 countries, I think. And there are about 3,500 to 4,000 people who have qualified via those to become coaches of parkour around the world. So and they then go on, obviously, to teach hundreds of other people. So that's probably the biggest influence that, and the most important influence that you could have is helping people learn how to teach something well, so that they can then teach other people. Because then, if I run a course that teaches 20 people to become good coaches of parkour, those 20 people can go on and each teach 1,000 people in the next year. So, that one course has then affected 20,000 people. And that's kind of how we see it, is sort of dropping a stone in the water, and the ripple comes out, the ripple spread out, and each course is a stone dropping. So, and each coach is someone that can go on and become their own stone and affect another load of people. So that's probably the biggest influence we've had. Obviously, we've been involved in the performance world, and been involved in movies and productions like that, and stunt work, and we still are. We build parkour facilities, indoors and outdoors around the world. We have our own branches around the world, in the States, in Brazil, in South Korea, in Taiwan, or whatever. So, we have an impact in that way as well. But the parkour community around the world is really good and really strong. There are many fantastic organizations around the world who have grown up either working with us, or partners with us, or emulating us, and they've created awesome communities around the world. So now we're just one organization amongst many really good organizations. But early on, I suppose we were one of the trailblazers because there were no other professional organizations that started back then. We were the ones that were crazy enough to end up sort of doing it as a career from the start. You know, we, not that we ever intended to. We didn't really sort of think, let's make our career parkour. We were just practicing it so much, and we got asked to do media stuff, and we got asked to teach. And one day, me and the two other founders of Parkour Generations, two of the French guys, we just kind of woke up one day and were like, you know what, this is our career now. This is what we do professionally. We get paid to do parkour, and we don't have time to do anything else. So we better get pretty good at doing this professionally, because this is what we do now. So that's how it came about. You know, we didn't plan it. We were just the ones crazy enough to think, yeah, we could probably make a career out of this, out of parkour. We could probably do that. Why not? Let's do that. It's
When
kind of how
people,
it happened.
when people look at, if they're looking up online at parkour, they can see videos, TV shows, movies, all different types of stuff that people can find and be interested in. Are you surprised at how big media mainstream parkour has gotten with the TV shows? I think there's been like American Ninja Warrior has been a popular, or Ninja Warrior in general, just has been popular, where it's showcasing these skills that these individuals have, no matter what age they are, where they've come from. They all are showing that interest in parkour in a way.
Yeah, I mean, the growth has been meteoric. You know, there's no doubt about it, and that's been helped obviously by technology and the internet and social media and all these sort of things. It's obviously sped that up a lot. But yeah, if you'd asked us back in 2003 or 2005, even 2007, if you'd said to us, parkour is going to eventually do this, and it'll be on this scale, and it'll be watched by millions, and it'll be moving into the Olympics, which is going to happen. We would probably have been sort of like, really? I mean, we did not plan that. No. And like I say, when I started training, there were maybe 50 people in the world that even knew the word and knew what it was, and it was a very, very small, exclusive, secretive community of people. So to go from that in 17 years or so, 17, 18 years, to go from a community that big to where it is now, whereby for example, in the UK we got it recognized as a sport, so it now has the same status here as football or rugby or tennis or hockey or whatever. It's like I say, it's going to be on the Olympics. It's Ninja Warrior, there's World Chase Tag, there's Ultimate Parkour was a TV show in America. It's most action movies now have parkour scenes and parkour coordinators on them. Almost all Hollywood action movies now have a parkour element going on within them. So that's great. The growth of it is crazy in a way. Crazy for that to happen in less than 2 decades is amazing, meteoric. And to have been part of that and been involved, especially in the early years when we were the ones forging those industries, and being involved in the first movies and the first TV shows, or the first commercials and things like that. To be amongst that community who were involved in that. Is now I understand that it's quite a privilege to have been in that situation, because not many people in the world get to experience being at the forefront of a new movement like that when it's that young, and being involved in that kind of rush of attention and just the speed of growth of it. And that was quite a privilege to have been involved in that, I think. Yeah. So, but no, we never would have imagined. I mean, when we began, we just loved training, right? We just loved moving, and there were like 5 or 6 of us when I moved back to the UK. There were like 5 or 6 of us in England who would train in London, and would meet up like once, twice a week in the evenings as a group to train. And there would be a few of it, and that would be it. We'd just be moving around London, climbing the rooftops, finding jumps, finding challenges. No one knew what we were doing. And we enjoyed that. We enjoyed the fact that it was just us and that no one else in the world knew what we were doing. But now it's very different. Now everybody in the world knows what parkour is. Thanks to The Office and TV shows like that, and movies like Casino Royale or whatever. Everyone knows what it is now. But when I started, no one knew what it was. Absolutely no one. So it's very different.
I think for me, I didn't even know about it until these shows came out. And then each time I'm watching the shows, like, okay, I'm like hooked onto it. And I will watch people, learn from people. I'm not saying I'm good. I've never done parkour, free running in that sense, but it's just, it's so fascinating the things that people can do with their body and just like the small area that they're in or off of a wall. That it's just amazing. And I think it's just, it shows the
Mm.
talent and the skills that people are willing to learn and like research and get better. And it's just like any sport nowadays where they want to learn from someone and there's all these different areas that they can learn. And it's just amazing. Have you ever had that moment where you're like, I could do like the shows or I could be on there? Like, have you ever had that like moment where I want to try out for those?
Well, I mean, yeah, I mean, you got to remember that we were the ones did that first, right? So we were the ones in the movies and the TV shows and the TV commercials. So so we have been there and have done that. And I was never hugely interested in that element of it. I did it because we were asked to, and there was no one else at the time. So we were asked to be, do the stunts for this Hollywood movie, or do this TV commercial, or do this TV show, and we'd be like, oh yeah, okay. I mean, because there was no one else to do it. We were asked, and okay, and it meant we got to travel around the world and do all that cool stuff. But it was never really a huge interest to me. So now we have performance departments, and we have performance athletes, and our teams of performers around the world that do that stuff, and they're awesome at it and they love doing it. But I don't really do that anymore. I haven't done it for many years. It just doesn't really interest me. I'm mainly interested in the coaching, the teaching, and understanding the discipline in that way. And helping to spread it to the new generation like that. But yeah, I mean, we did that early on, and I suppose the first time you do a paid commercial job, like someone flies you out to Nicaragua to go and do a big TV commercial there, or Brazil or Russia or whatever. The first time you do that, you kind of think, this is a bit weird. Like someone's paying me money to go and jump off a building and film it. And, but you pretty quickly get used to it. Pretty quickly we became professional at it. And we understood that this is, the same as performing, same as being a stunt person or an actor. You pretty quickly realize that, yeah, it's just that this is there's a professional path here, and people want us to be able to do these skills for their purposes, and we're happy to make that exchange. But it becomes like, that element of it becomes a profession, I suppose, professional, a vocation, and you do that, and that's fine. But it was never a great interest to me hugely. I was more interested in my own training and helping others through it. So helping others understand what they could do with their body, and helping them understand the potential, physical and psychological potential that they have as a human being, which they probably aren't exploring properly. And parkour helps people understand that very early, very quickly. It helps them realize that they can do things that they never thought they would be able to do. And that their body and mind has far more potential than they can imagine. And that's the best thing about doing what we do, is helping someone understand that, and within a few hours or a few sessions, they go from a very limited view of what their body can do to realizing that, wow, I can do these things. I can jump, I can vault, I can get over that wall. I can move my body in ways I never thought possible. And I can overcome these fears that I didn't think I would be able to overcome. I have fear of heights, and now I can balance on a wall 20 feet in the air. That might happen to someone within a month of training. And you see them realize, wow, what else could I do? That you see them thinking like that, if I could do this, what else am I holding myself back on? What else could I do? What other challenges could I overcome? That for me is the most interesting element of it. Far more interesting than performing in a Spider-Man movie or doing a Nike TV commercial or whatever. I mean, we've done it. It's fun, but at the end of the day, it's fairly meaningless, I think, for me anyway.
So what does the future look like for you professionally and personally? What are you hoping to accomplish in the next few years?
So there's a lot we've got on our plates, assuming that the lockdowns sort of end and the world goes back to some semblance of normality. We're building a huge online portal for parkour where people will be able to get access to training and courses and teaching like never before, wherever they are in the world. So there'll be no limit really to people being able to engage with the teaching methodologies that we have. That's a big build, and we're doing that at the moment. We're also obviously expanding our bases around the world, so building new facilities. We're opening another academy in London at the moment, and different places around the world, sort of opening up new clubs and new gyms and new teaching paradigms. So those over the next few years, that's all going to be developing in a big way. And our facility design department is really expanding at the moment. So we continue to grow in all those areas, which is great. And I'm sort of, I suppose, overseeing that as the director. So I oversee all these sort of international projects growth, which is great and great fun, and expanding and opening the door for parkour into new industries is always really cool as well. And me personally, I'm interested also in sort of trying to spend more time in writing. I mean, I've published books on parkour before, which is cool, but I'm very interested in writing, in publishing other types of books, novels and stories and screenplays and things like that I've always been doing since I was a kid, but have never really done anything professional with it. Never really been that interested in that, in doing it professionally. But now I'm quite interested in spending more time doing that. So that, from a personal point of view, I will definitely spend the next 5-10 years much more of that time writing and producing that kind of content. But that doesn't mean that what we do in the parkour world and the company's growth is going to slow down. It's just going to accelerate over the next few years. And the interest in parkour is also accelerating hugely. With the rise of it, the interest now and that we have from the Olympics and bodies like that. Whether that's good or bad for parkour as a whole, it's difficult to say at this stage. But the demand and the interest for parkour is going through the roof. So we know that the demand for good teaching and for good training methodology is going to rise commensurately with that. So we're kind of just building things up to be able to manage that demand as it comes. So it's going to be a busy few years, assuming that the world gets back to normal. Hopefully we'll be able to travel again. I haven't left the country this year, which is the first time I think in like 30 years that I haven't been abroad in a year, which normally I travel 20-30 times a year internationally, and this year no travel at all, which is very interesting.
For someone that's listening to this interview, based on your journey and experience, what tips or advice would you give them to overcome their obstacles, accomplish their goals, and rise to their challenge?
There's a lot, but the key things I would say are seek out adversity. So don't run away from the things that you think are hard. The things that you think you can't do. Those are things you must go towards. So we have an idea in parkour that when you begin a challenge, if you know you can do it, it's not a challenge. It's just training, it's just routine, right? If you know you can do something when you start it, it's not really a challenge. A challenge by definition is something that you're not sure you can pull off. You're not sure you're going to succeed. Now it's a challenge. Mm-hmm. So my advice to anyone in the world, really, any situation, young, old, whatever, is if there's something you want to do, but you're holding yourself back because you're not sure you'll succeed, do it. You must go towards the adversity. Maybe you won't do it. Maybe you will fail. But the things you will learn from failing to do the thing that you want to do, those things will be invaluable, and it will help you when you try again. They will help you succeed. So just don't quit. Just keep doing the thing. Keep trying, keep experimenting, keep using the feedback, and you will eventually get there. But you've got to be willing to seek out those difficult things from the start, and don't shy away from adversity. So, engage with things that are difficult. Look for those things. It's a very stoic philosophy, I suppose. But when you understand it, when you appreciate the importance of that kind of stoicism, then you realize that's the only way you can actually sort of find out who you are and discover your potential. If you don't do that, you will never really learn what you're capable of. So you must seek the harder road. Another one of the core concepts in parkour is, if there are two sort of pathways, choose the harder one, choose the harder path. because you'll learn more from doing it that way. So don't do it the easy way, do it the hard way. And the things you will learn from that will be far more beneficial, and make you a stronger individual. So, that which doesn't kill you makes you stronger, right? So seek the challenging things, go through them, embrace the adversity, and you'll realize that the adversity, the difficulty, the suck is the way. That is the thing that makes you who you are. So yeah, go for it.
Well, Dan, I want to thank you so much for coming on the show and talking about your rise to the challenge. We all have learned so much, and we're inspired to see what the future looks like for you.
Thank you very much, man, and thank you for the invite. It's a pleasure, and great work on creating this podcast and bringing together such diverse people in this kind of forum for communication. It's really cool endeavor. And I know, as you said to me before we started, this was something this was your response to adversity. This was a response to the COVID lockdowns, right? So that's exactly it. It was a challenging situation. It's a very challenging situation for the whole world right now. But your response was to create something positive out of it and to create connection and communication. And that's just down to your mindset and your willingness to embrace a difficult situation. So, you're a great example of that, of everything we've been discussing. You're a great example of that, man.